welcome back to the episode of Stories of Horror. Another episode we dive into the mysteries and the unknowns of the world. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Without further ado, hit the intro. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Stories of Horror. Another episode where we dive into the unknowns and mysteries of the world. This is episode 27, and by the title, you've already seen what this episode is going to be about the mystery case of Mr. Cruel, a serial killer that took place, or kind of serial killer and a kidnapper, and just a violent individual that took place back in the late 80s in Australia. We're going to discuss that topic here and get more details. I really don't know anything too much about Mr. Cruel. Like, this is one of the topics that I'm learning with you guys, like right here, because Mr. Cruel, I never really heard anything about it. I seen the image before, but I really never dove fully into the story. But that's what I'm doing today, to dive into the story. And usually I have the stuff already pre-made, because it's stuff I already know. I just kind of write stuff down and have it detail to detail. But I'm going to dive into it with you guys, live like this, right in the moment right here. So let's sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it. On the morning of August 22nd, 1987, a masked man known only as Mr. Cruel broke into a family's home in the quiet suburb of Lower Plenty on the outskirts of Melbourne, Australia. He forced both parents onto their stomachs when he broke in, bound their hands, tied them up, and locked them in a closet. He then proceeded to tie up their 7-year-old son to a bed, and then he proceeded to sexually assault their 11-year-old daughter. After those horrific actions, he cut the phone lines of the entire house, and then he led the scene. The intruder, known as Mr. Cruel, embarked on a sadistic abduction spree that saw 4 Melbourne children disappear into the early 90s. But no one could ever stop him or even get evidence on him, because there was no trace, so they can never identify him. And to this day, they still haven't identified Mr. Cruel at all. Cruel's first attack was on that morning of 1987. Mr. Cruel established himself as some type of mystery man. Some called him a boogeyman that would strike fear into parents and children alike for over a decade. After the twisted attack on the family in Lower Plenty, the police investigation were called and the investigation began. The family that got their house broken into on the first attack told the police that the intruder detached a pane from their living room window and then proceeded to make his way into the parents' bedroom, clutching a knife in one hand and a gun in the other. To subdue them, the intruder utilized a type of knot most commonly used by sailors, or at least some type of nautical experience. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Mr. Cruel raped their 11-year-old daughter. When he finally left, he stole a box of records and he left with a blue jacket. The little girl who was the victim of this attack was eventually able to tell the police that the intruder used the family phone to call someone else during one of his break-ins and attacking her. From what the girl heard, this call was a threatening one, with the man demanding person on the other end of the line to move their children or they will be next, and he referred to this unknown person as Bozo. When the police checked the family phone records, there was no evidence of the call whatsoever. It would later become clear that this Mr. Cruel was planning a red herring to purposely confuse investigators to throw them off, and he did that successfully and kept them off his trail for many, many years. The next horrific crime took place over a year later. Just days after Christmas in 1988, John Willis, his wife, and their 4 daughters were fast asleep in their Ringwood area home, a couple of miles southeast where the previous crime has taken place. Wearing a dark blue overall and a dark ski mask, Mr. Cruel broke into the Willis home and held a gun to John Willis' head. As before, he clutched a knife in his other hand and he told the parents to roll over on their stomach, and then he tied them up and gagged them. The intruder assured that Wills and he were only there for money, but then he methodically cut the phone lines and made his way to the bedroom where the 4 Wills daughters all slept. Mr. Cruel proceeded to wake up the 10-year-old daughter, Shara Wills. The man quickly woke her up, blindfolded her, and gagged her, and then picked up a few items of her clothing and fled the house with her the early next morning. After the father, John Wills, freed himself, he noticed the phone lines were cut. He rushed next door to the neighbor's house to use their phone to call the police. However, Mr. Cruel was long gone, and so was Sharon Willis, his 10-year-old daughter. 18 hours later, a woman stumbled upon a tiny figure standing on a street corner just after midnight. Dressed in green garbage bags, it was Sharon Wills. As Sharon Wills was reunited with her family, she gave police some startling clues to who her attacker could be. Because Wills was blindfolded throughout her assault, she was unable to give a full physical description of Mr. Cruel, but she did recall how shortly before letting her go, the suspect made sure to give her a thorough bath. Mr. Cruel not only washed off any forensic evidence he had left behind, but also clipped her fingernails and toenails and brushed and flossed her teeth. Investigators quickly tied this incident to the previous one in Lower Plenty, and a domain of fear and apprehension was beginning to take shape in the Melbourne suburbs. The third attack was on July 3rd, 1990, in the suburb of Canterbury, Victoria, which is west of Ringwood and south of Lower Plenty. Here resided the Linus family, a well-off English family who'd been renting a house along the prestigious Monmouth Avenue. This distinguished neighborhood has been home of plenty Australian politicians and public officials in its time, making it a secure area to live, or so they believed that it was secure enough to live. On that day, the father and mother, Brian and Rosemary Linus, were attending a farewell party and left their two daughters home alone. Then just before midnight, 15-year-old Fiona and 13-year-old Nicola were woken by a ranting and commanding of orders of a masked intruder. Armed with his usual gun and knife, he instructed Nicola to go into another room to pick up her ladies' college school uniform while he tied up Fiona in her bed. Mr. Cruel informed Fiona that her father would need to pay him $25,000 for Nicola's return, and then he took off with his young victim in family rental's car, which was parked in the driveway. Mr. Cruel drove about a half a mile down the road, parked, and then transferred to another vehicle so no one would be on his trail. 20 minutes after the abduction, Brian and Rosemary Linus returned back home, where they found 15-year-old Fiona tied to her bed with a ransom message from Mr. Cruel. And then just a few days later, Nicola was dropped off at an electricity station not far from her home. She was fully dressed, wrapped in a blanket, and still blindfolded. When she was confident that Mr. Cruel had driven away and left the scene, she removed the blindfold and shakily made her way to the nearby house. It was just after 2 a.m. when she phoned home. Nicola was able to offer the investigators some details that were vital to the investigation. Most notable among them was a rough estimate of the attacker's height, which was about 5'8". Nicola also revealed that the suspect might possibly have reddish brown hair. Some details of her ordeal were more horrifying. She revealed that throughout her time in captivity, she was forced to lay down into a neck brace contraption fastened to the abductor's bed, restraining her while she was abused. Nicola also claimed that she heard him speaking aloud to another person, but she never heard a response. Investigators weren't entirely sure whether this meant that there was an accomplice, but it's more likely that this is another one of Mr. Cruel's many red herrings to throw them off again. Cruel's final attacking was on April 13, 1991. Mr. Cruel broke into the home of John and Phyllis Chan in the affluent Templestowe district of Victoria. That night, they trusted their 13-year-old daughter, Carmine, to watch over her 2 younger siblings. It seemed Mr. Cruel knew this, as detectives believe he would stake out his victims for weeks or even months ahead of time, learning their habits and movements. At roughly 8:40 that evening, Carmine and one of her sisters headed to the family's kitchen to make some food when they were startled by Mr. Cruel standing in there in a green and gray tracksuit. "I only want your money," Mr. Cruel lied to the 3 girls, forcing the 2 younger siblings in Carmine's wardrobe. He claimed he wanted Carmine by herself to show him what her money was, and he pushed the bed in front of the closet to lock the 2 youngest sisters as he made his escape. Minutes later, the 2 frightened sisters managed to push open the wardrobe doors and immediately called their father at the family restaurant. By the time the police arrived, they knew what to expect. They'd been to enough of Mr. Cruel's crime scenes to know what had taken place at the home. The investigators found a note written in large, bold letters on Phyllis Chan's Toyota's Camry shortly after the abduction. It read, "Payback, Asian drug dealer. More and more to come." But after combining John Chan's background, this proved that to be just another one of Mr. Cruel's red herrings to throw off the investigators. Days later, the Chans posted an encrypted letter in a local paper using a cipher that Carmine Chan would have been able to decrypt. They offered a hefty $300,000 ransom in exchange for the safe return of their daughter. Carmine Chan abduction triggered one of the largest manhunts in Australian history, known as the Operation Spectrum. It was a multi-million-dollar undertaking that devoured tens of thousands of police man-hours alongside many thousands more of volunteer hours. But sadly, Carmine would never be reunited with her family. Nearly 1 year after Carmine's abduction, on April 9, 1992, a man walking his dog in the close-by area of Thomastown happened to stumble upon a fully decomposed skeleton. This was eventually revealed to be identified as Carmine Chan's. An autopsy revealed that Carmine Chan has been shot 3 times in the head, execution style, probably not long after her abduction. Theories have swirled as to why Mr. Cruel murdered Carmine when he released all the other victims. Carmine's mother theorized that because her daughter was stubborn and would have fought against her attacker, she likely learned too much about him for him to let her go. Operation Spectrum continued for the next few years to search for Mr. Cruel. The 40-member task force investigated over 27,000 potential suspects, collected over tens of thousands of tips from the public, and searched over 30,000 houses in the hopes of turning over a single clue. They never did. Spectrum was eventually shelved for good in 1994, but it eventually resurfaced in 2022. Long after the Operation Task Force disbanded, reports surfaced that an unidentified criminal had come forward 20 years earlier and told detectives that he knew who Mr. Cruel was. The man claimed that the culprit was known as criminal name Normal Ling Lee, whose house supposedly matched the victims said about Mr. Cruel's house, but the trail ran cold from there. The same year, an investigator named Mike King went to public with a theory that Mr. Cruel attacks were targeted to areas that had electrical substations nearby, suggesting that the culprit may have posed as a utility worker, but again, the case ran cold from there as well. To this very day, Mr. Cruel has never been identified. That right there was a horrific story, a very terrible story. Mr. Cruel has not been identified to this day. I guess they consider him a serial killer. I don't know how many victims he have, like, fully. Those are like some of the victims he abducted, but he could have abducted more people after. They couldn't really find any evidence on him like that. They can never get a trace on him. They can never like find anything or any clues to lead back to him to like even like suspect any more victims like that. But most likely it probably was like that. But it's a cruel story. The young girl losing her life like that, getting shot 3 times in the head like that, execution style. Mr. Cruel was a very ill person, and it happened in the late 80s and early 90s. So he could be still alive like that, because I don't know how old Mr. Cruel could have been like back then. Maybe he could have been in his 20s or 30s, like mid-20s or late 20s or 30s like that, so he could still be alive to this day. You never know exactly, but he has not been identified to this day. It's a crazy story, a mystery, an unknown mystery, a horrific story like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed, well, not enjoyed the video, but I hope you guys like enjoyed the details and talking of the mystery like that. But yeah, it's a crazy story. I'm gonna try to upload this exactly at 6 o'clock like that. I know I've been uploading weird times. I uploaded on Saturday. I uploaded on one at 9 o'clock before. The past 2 episodes have been uploaded out of schedule, but this one will be uploaded on schedule at 6 o'clock like that. So stay tuned for that. But the next episode is gonna be something very good. Probably something dealing with something supernatural and that sort. So stay tuned for that as well. But that's all I got for this video today, guys. If you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.